Okay, we're going to segue over and we're going to look at another particular case study, but this one has to do with ergonomic factors. And this is a service in Minneapolis, St. Paul, a hospital-based service also. And they had a crash, and this is going to be the news story on it. And we'll talk a little bit about it after the story's over with.
Involved in a head-on crash early Saturday morning.
Yes, the two were taking a patient to Buffalo Hospital when they hit an SUV head on. Scott Washington is following the story. Scott, how are they doing?
Well, first of all, look at this picture right here. And when you think of this picture, you would be surprised to know that one of them is actually out of the hospital. His name is Tim Daly. Now, I talked with Brian Nagel's sister. He's the paramedic that's still in critical condition in the hospital tonight. She says her brother's improving, but at this point, doctors have not been able to get him off the breathing tube. And of course, looking at the scene, it's amazing that nobody died.
It's always surprising to hear when the first responders and EMS get in an accident like this. It doesn't happen every day.
That's the voice of Albertville Fire Chief Tate Mills. His friend and volunteer firefighter colleague Tim Daly was behind the wheel of the Alina ambulance Saturday night when it hit head on with this SUV. Tim suffered major leg injuries and could be in a wheelchair for up to 3 months.
He's one of those guys that's always there. He's very reliable and kind of a staple in the community that way.
The crash took place on County Road 35, just a few miles from Buffalo, as the paramedics were taking a patient to the hospital. In the back, treating the patient, Brian Nagel. His sister tells us tonight that Brian is on a ventilator, has severe head trauma, and skull and face fractures. On Facebook, the family writes, "I know when Brian recovers, you will be touched and overwhelmed to know that there was so many people praying for him."
They're a couple of wonderful guys. We work with the ambulance staff all the time on a daily basis, and you get to know them, and the camaraderie goes between law enforcement officers as well as our ambulance drivers and our paramedics as well as firefighters and everything. So you do develop personal relationships over the years.
Lieutenant Sean Derringer has worked with both men, says the conditions were terrible at the time of the crash.
The officers reported that it was snowing heavily, and it was also made worse by the fact that there was a wind blowing that night, and that is a wide open area. So obviously it made the conditions very difficult.
And when looking at this scene, you would think it possible for anyone to survive, let alone help others. But we're told that Tim Daly even tried to help others despite being severely hurt himself.
That's the type of person he is. He's out to help other people.
It's amazing he tried to help out. And the woman in the SUV, Marilyn Common, she suffered severe head trauma and many other injuries. She too is in critical condition at North Memorial tonight. The one good piece of news, we can report for you the patient in the ambulance, Laura Worley. She was uninjured, and get this guy, she actually called 911 for help in the back of the ambulance. Brian's sister tried telling me that you cannot thank her enough for her strength and bravery during that time of tragedy. Back to you guys.
Sure hope everybody's able to pull through that. That's
Yeah,
a scary situation.
awful.
You know, what's interesting is that when you look at these pictures, you know, and you see an ambulance crash, you see the cab, okay, really destroyed. But when you hear about where the most serious injury was in the patient compartment, and yet that box is hardly even touched. Doesn't even look like, you know, there was any kind of impact at all. But the majority of them, fatalities are happening in there. And this is a classic example. You saw that picture, the front end of that cab, I mean, was crushed really good. But the patient compartment, you know, you don't see a thing. I talked to Brian Nagel, you know, after he recovered, and I asked him what happened, and he told me that you heard in the story that, you know, it was snowing heavily, the wind was blowing. These guys actually ran road safety. Tim was driving slow. He was doing about 25 miles an hour, and he was having a real difficult time picking up the side of the road. And what he did was he kind of moved over to the side, and he got the rumble strips. So the rumble strips was his indication, okay, when he heard them, I know where the side of the road is. But Brian heard that sound, and he had no idea what it was. So he goes up, he looks through the walkthrough, and he says, "Tim, what is that?" Tim told him, like, "Oh, okay, it makes sense." He then went back, was getting a neb ready for his patient, and then that's when the other car struck them head on. Outcome of that, the driver of that SUV, she died 48 hours after the crash. Brian, traumatic brain injury, hospitalized for 3 weeks. Tim had many, many surgeries, and of course, typical lawsuits going back and forth on that. This particular crash really shook their admin team to the core. They were like, how could something like this happen? We were only going, so slow, and yet Brian gets, a traumatic brain injury. So what they did is that they actually reached out to me for just some kind of information about, what do you think, Dave? What should we do? And we started talking about ergonomics, the layout of the ambulance. And we all kind of came to the same conclusion that if we're not buckled into the back of an ambulance, we become a missile in a crash. But the problem is being buckled in. I never wore a seatbelt. You never wear a seatbelt because you can't touch the patient. How do you get to your monitor? How do you get to the pump or vent? You just can't do anything. So ergonomically, the poor ergonomics and layouts, that squad bench is the reason why we're getting all these, horrific injuries. And that's exactly what happened to Brian. But Alignment decided to change it. And they became a cover page story with EMS World. And they totally designed the interior of their ambulance. And a little bit later, I'll show you exactly what they went to. Great design. Our colleagues in fire, they have their crashes, and as well as in law enforcement, they have their crashes too. But when you get to EMS, what is interesting is that when you have a type 1 or a type 3, the box on the back of the patient compartment, that does not have to conform to federal motor vehicle safety standards. And if it had to, we would see a totally different ambulance. Now, your type 2s do conform because they're not doing any additional modification to it. It's just a high top. It's a van. But the actual modular unit on the back of the ambulance does not have to conform. And it's because of not having to conform, it's exempt from all these kinds of safety standards. And those safety standards are there in place to protect us. We're going to go into some research numbers, and again, I'm not going to spend much time on this to bore you, but I'll show you just some of the ones that I really want to highlight. I've always said you can lie about the numbers, but the numbers don't lie. That's Hunter Ambulance out of Long Island, New York, and killed 3 in that crash. And how fast do you have to be going to literally pancake the front of that vehicle when you hit? They hit a brick wall. Yeah, they hit a brick wall. Absolutely on that one. These are, some of the sources where the data comes from. As far as some of the statistics go, yeah, there's about 65 crashes a year. I mean, every year that number goes up, it goes down, it goes back up again. I would say on average, since I've been looking at these numbers, it hovers right around 6,500, goes a little higher or lower, about 18 a day. There's the other number right there, 54%, because 54% kills more EMS providers than all other causes combined. So you have a greater chance of dying, in a crash than all other causes. Seriously injure, an average about 10 people every single day. And that's not only in the ambulance, but it's also outside of the ambulance, people in other vehicles. This study that was done right here really kind of showed the red flag, and it shows just how dangerous we are as compared to those that are employed to drive a vehicle and firefighting and law enforcement. This was a report that was done by NHTSA, and they have a kind of a subset organization called the FARS, or the Fatality Analysis Reporting System. All data from fatal crashes goes into that database, and they look at it. What this report showed is that in general population, the rate of fatalities is, and let me define the general population. This isn't you going to the store, okay? That group right there is anybody that is employed to drive a vehicle, and during that employment of driving a vehicle, which could be a truck, a school bus, tow truck, Amazon, whatever, they fall into that general population. Their rate of fatalities is 2 for every 100,000 full-time employees. Firefighting is 4.5. Out of that 4.5, if you are a firefighter and you have EMS in an ambulance and you are driving that ambulance and you are killed, it's 2.0, okay? Out of that 4.5. Law enforcement is 6.3, and there we are at EMS, 12.7 to 100,000. That's the gigantic red flag out there. And if you take that 2 from firefighting and you add it to EMS, okay, we're getting close to 15 to 100,000. That's the gigantic red flag. And this is what the research is telling us right here. So this, if you make the statement that we have a higher rate of death and crashes than law enforcement and firefighters combined, is absolutely true. We do. So where do we have most of our crashes? Intersections, yeah, very, very dangerous place, intersection. You can see that there is a stop sign right here. It says right here, 4-way. This is Philadelphia back in April. Going code 3. What do we do when we get to an intersection, especially in an urban area? Okay, right? What do? We're going code 3. We stop. Okay. This is how this stuff happens. Yeah, injured all 3 in that one, but this is how fast it happens. Okay, and that medic firefighter was 100% at fault. You know these guys really well. You must know about that crash. Okay, I got all the details on that last night. Okay, I always go out looking for really high resolution photographs, and that was a pretty good high resolution. And I'm like, oh my God, look at the damage to that, you know. But I was, literally last night I was shocked to find out nobody was killed in that one. Amazing on that. But again, when we look at statistics, 70% of crashes occur while operating in emergent mode. Okay, operating lights and sirens is extremely dangerous, which begs the question, does a faster response time equate to better patient outcomes? Absolutely right. Yeah, it does not. Okay, the data is there to support that. One of the presentations that I do at conferences is it's titled "Unsafe at Any Speed." It's one of my most popular ones right now. There's a medical director for state of Pennsylvania, Dr. Doug Kupas. He and I have co-presented on this. He literally is the guru of, you know, lights and sirens no longer being needed anymore. He's got some great research that he has done. And I'm not going to get into the research right here, but I mean, you can look at it every which way that you want. You can look at it from trauma cases to medical cases. And they've looked at all different age groups, different types of trauma, medical, and basically what the research is saying is that there only are a few small cases, whether medical and or trauma, where a faster response time does help improve outcomes, but it's a very, very, very small group on that. And what's happening is now, you know, when the medical directors, you know, they all get together at the Gathering of Eagles conference, this right now is one of the biggest topics. So we're educating the medical directors, and actually a doctor is a researcher. You know, they're kind of like, they're very into science, and they read this and they're like, they're coming to the same conclusion. So they go back to their ambulance service and they're saying, no, folks, you know, unless it's one of these, no more lights and sirens, you know, response. You know, think about another one. There's another good study that's out. What are the effects of somebody that's having an AMI? Okay. And now you're transporting them with lights and sirens. What effect is that having on their heart? Okay. So there is that study that's out there. And again, too, I mean, why do we give pain meds to cardiac patients? Reduce the pain, reduce the anxiety, reduce the anxiety, reduce the workload on the heart. Yeah. And there's Dr. Kuptas right here. You'll probably hear a little bit more about this. I know there's going to be a big push this fall, and it's going to be a 12-month push on reducing license high-res response.